Margaret Harrison walked through the hallways of Lincoln High School like a storm cloud ready to burst. Her black heels clicked against the polished floor with military precision, each step echoing through the corridors. Students pressed themselves against lockers as she passed, whispering behind their hands about the woman they called the Iron Principal. At 52, Margaret had been running Lincoln High for 8 years. She was not the kind of principal who smiled at students or cracked jokes during morning announcements. Instead, she enforced rules with an iron fist that made even the toughest teenagers think twice before stepping out of line. "No running in the halls," she would say in her sharp voice, stopping a student mid-sprint. "Detention after school. Phones away during class time," she would announce, confiscating devices without hesitation. "You can collect it from my office at the end of the day." The students did not understand her. They saw her as mean, unfair, and too strict for her own good. Teachers whispered that she was too harsh, that she treated the school like a prison instead of a place of learning. Parents complained at PTA meetings that she was ruining their children's high school experience with her endless rules and punishments. What they did not know was that Margaret Harrison had not always been this way before coming to Lincoln High. Margaret had worked at Jefferson Middle School in the rougher part of town. She had been softer then, more understanding, more willing to give students second and third chances. She believed in redemption and trusted that kindness would win over even the most difficult students. That belief had nearly cost her everything. It was a Tuesday morning when 13-year-old Marcus Williams brought a knife to school. Margaret had been working with Marcus for months, trying to help him deal with his anger issues and family problems at home. She had given him chance after chance, overlooking small incidents because she believed he just needed someone to care about him. The knife was discovered during a routine locker check. Marcus had been planning to use it on another student who had been bullying him. When Margaret found out, she realized how close they had come to tragedy. Her kindness and second chances had almost led to a student getting seriously hurt or killed. That day changed everything for Margaret. She promised herself that she would never again let her guard down when it came to student safety. She would rather be seen as the mean principal than risk another situation like that. So when she came to Lincoln High, she implemented strict rules from day one. No phones during class because distracted students missed warning signs of trouble. No running in halls because it often led to accidents or altercations. No tolerance for even small rule breaking because small problems often grew into big ones. The students at Lincoln High knew none of this history. They just saw a woman who seemed to enjoy making their lives difficult. "She gave me detention for being 2 minutes late," complained 17-year-old Sarah Chen to her friends at lunch. 2 minutes? Like the world was going to end. "She made me redo my entire history project because the margins were wrong," added Jake Morrison, stabbing his fork into his cafeteria meatloaf. "I spent 3 weeks on that thing." "My mom says she's the worst principal the school has ever had," said Emma Rodriguez. "She's trying to get a petition going to have her removed." The complaints were endless. Margaret heard about them through teachers, through overheard conversations, through the cold stares she received at school events. She knew she was not liked, but she told herself it did not matter. Her job was not to be popular. Her job was to keep students safe and create an environment where learning could happen. But sometimes, late at night in her small apartment, Margaret wondered if she had gone too far. She would look at old photos from her Jefferson Middle School days, when students would hug her in the hallways and invite her to their graduation ceremonies. She missed those connections, but she could not forget the lesson she had learned about the price of being too trusting. The breaking point came during the spring semester of her 8th year at Lincoln High. A group of senior students decided they had had enough of Principal Harrison's strict rules. They started a social media campaign called Free Lincoln High, where they posted memes and videos making fun of her policies. The videos went viral in the local community. Students from other schools started sharing them, adding their own jokes about the prison principal of Lincoln High. Parents began sharing the content, some laughing along with their children about the woman who had made their teenagers' lives so difficult. Margaret saw the videos but said nothing. She continued her daily routines, enforcing rules, giving detentions, and maintaining order. But inside, each joke and meme felt like a small cut. She had dedicated her career to protecting students, and this was how they saw her. The social media campaign grew bolder. Students started recording her interactions with them, trying to catch her being unreasonable. They would deliberately break small rules just to film her response and post it online with sarcastic comments. Watch the iron principle. Destroy another student's soul over a dress code violation. Read one caption under a video of Margaret asking a student to change out of a shirt with inappropriate language. Margaret's reputation spread beyond Lincoln High. Other schools in the district started using her as an example of how not to connect with students. Education blogs picked up the story, writing articles about outdated disciplinary approaches in modern schools. Through it all, Margaret remained silent. She did not defend herself or explain her methods. She simply continued doing what she believed was right, even as the criticism grew louder and more personal. She had no idea that everything was about to change, and that the very students who mocked her would soon understand exactly why she had built those walls around herself and around their school. The Free Lincoln High campaign reached its peak during the last week of March. Students had organized what they called Silly Rule Day, where they planned to break as many of Principal Harrison's minor rules as possible, all while filming her reactions. Emma Rodriguez had become the unofficial leader of the movement. She was a straight-A student, captain of the debate team, and planning to attend Stanford in the fall. Her parents supported her efforts, believing that someone needed to stand up to the unreasonable principal who was making their daughter's senior year miserable. "Tomorrow is the day," Emma announced to her followers on social media. "We're going to show everyone just how ridiculous this place has become under Iron Principal Harrison." The plan was simple. Students would wear slightly inappropriate clothing, bring phones to class, walk slightly too fast in the hallways, and chew gum loudly during announcements. Nothing dangerous or truly disruptive, just enough to trigger Principal Harrison's strict responses while cameras rolled. Margaret knew something was planned. She could feel the tension in the building, see the excited whispers between students, notice the way phones were positioned to record her every move. But she also knew that reacting differently would only give them more ammunition for their campaign. Thursday morning arrived with an unusual energy in the air. Margaret stood at her usual post by the main entrance greeting students as they arrived. She noticed immediately that many were wearing clothes that pushed the boundaries of the dress code, and several had their phones out despite the morning ban on devices. "Good morning, Tyler," she said to a junior who was wearing a shirt with a small inappropriate image. "Please go to the office and call your parents to bring you a different shirt." Tyler grinned and held up his phone, which was clearly recording. "But Principal Harrison, it's just a tiny picture. It's not hurting anyone." "The dress code applies to all images, regardless of size," Margaret replied calmly. "Office, please." As Tyler walked away, still filming, Margaret noticed at least 6 other students recording the interaction from different angles. She continued her morning routine, addressing each violation she saw with the same calm authority she always used. By lunchtime, dozens of videos had been posted online. The Silly Rule Day was being declared a huge success by the students, who felt they had exposed Principal Harrison's unreasonable nature to the world. But not everyone was laughing. Detective Rachel Martinez of the local police department had been monitoring social media activity around the school as part of a routine check for potential threats. She had noticed the Free Lincoln High campaign weeks earlier, but had not considered it serious until she saw something that made her blood run cold. Hidden among the hundreds of comments and responses to the Silly Rule Day videos was a message that stood out. It was posted by an account with no profile picture and a randomly generated username. The message was short but clear. "That principal needs to learn her lesson permanently. I know where she lives." Detective Martinez immediately began tracking the account, but whoever had posted the message had used sophisticated methods to hide their identity. The IP address led to a public library computer, and the account had been created just hours before the message was posted. More concerning messages began appearing on different platforms. "Someone should teach her what real fear feels like. She won't be so tough when she's alone. I'm watching her." What worried Detective Martinez most was that these messages seemed to have inside knowledge. One comment mentioned that Principal Harrison drove a blue Honda Civic and parked in the 3rd spot from the building. Another mentioned that she stayed late on Tuesdays and Thursdays for faculty meetings. Someone was not just making idle threats. Someone was actually watching Margaret Harrison. Meanwhile, Margaret remained unaware of the growing danger. She continued her daily routines, dealing with the aftermath of Silly Rule Day and the continued social media attention. Several news outlets had picked up the story, framing it as a battle between old-school discipline and modern student rights. The students were enjoying their moment of fame. Emma Rodriguez had been interviewed by a local news station, where she spoke eloquently about the need for more understanding and less rigid rule enforcement in schools. "Principal Harrison treats us like criminals instead of students," Emma said to the camera. "We're good kids who just want to learn in an environment that doesn't feel like a jail." The interview aired that evening and was shared thousands of times on social media. Margaret watched it alone in her apartment, recognizing the intelligence and passion in Emma's words. For a moment, she wondered if the students were right. Maybe she had become too rigid, too disconnected from what teenagers needed. But then she remembered Marcus Williams and the knife he had brought to school all those years ago. She remembered the close call that had taught her the price of being too trusting. She reminded herself that her rules had kept Lincoln High safe for 8 years, even if students did not appreciate or understand why those rules existed. What Margaret did not know was that Detective Martinez was at that very moment sitting in an unmarked car outside her apartment building, watching for any suspicious activity. The threatening messages had escalated throughout the day. The anonymous user had posted Margaret's home address and mentioned that she usually arrived home around 6:30 each evening. Another message had included a detailed description of her daily route from school to home. Detective Martinez had tried calling the school to warn Principal Harrison, but it was after hours and she had not yet reached her. She decided to maintain surveillance until she could make contact the next morning. As Margaret prepared for bed that night, she had no idea that her life was about to change completely. She had no idea that the very students who had spent weeks mocking her strict rules were about to discover exactly why she had built such strong walls around their school. And she had no idea that lurking somewhere in the shadows was someone who saw her not as an overprotective principal, but as a target who needed to be eliminated. The next morning would bring revelations that would change everything at Lincoln High School, and finally show the students who Margaret Harrison really was beneath her strict exterior. Friday morning started like any other day at Lincoln High School. Margaret Harrison arrived at exactly 7:15, just as she had every day for the past 8 years. She parked her blue Honda Civic in her usual spot and walked toward the building with her familiar measured pace. Detective Martinez intercepted her before she reached the main entrance. "Principal Harrison, I'm Detective Rachel Martinez with the City Police. I need to speak with you privately about a serious matter." Margaret's training kicked in immediately. Most people would have been surprised or confused by a police detective approaching them at work. Margaret simply nodded and led Detective Martinez to her office without asking questions. "What can I help you with, Detective?" Margaret asked, settling behind her desk with the same calm demeanor she used for everything else. Detective Martinez pulled out her tablet and showed Margaret the threatening messages. "We've been monitoring social media activity around your school and found these concerning posts. Someone has been making specific threats against you and appears to have detailed knowledge of your daily routines." Margaret read through the messages without any visible change in expression. Detective Martinez watched her carefully, expecting shock, fear, or at least surprise. Instead, Margaret simply nodded as if she were reviewing a normal incident report. "Do you have any idea who might be behind these threats?" Detective Martinez asked. "No specific individuals come to mind," Margaret replied, "but I've received similar threats before at my previous position. It comes with the territory when you maintain strict discipline policies." Detective Martinez was puzzled by Margaret's calm reaction. "Principal Harrison, these threats mention your home address and your daily schedule. This person has been watching you. Aren't you concerned?" Margaret stood and walked to her office window, looking out at the students arriving for the day. "Detective, I appreciate your concern and I'll cooperate fully with your investigation. But I won't let threats change how I do my job. These students need protection even if they don't realize it." What Detective Martinez did not know was that Margaret Harrison was not just an educator who had learned to be tough. Before becoming a principal, Margaret had served 12 years in the military police. She had been deployed twice to overseas conflict zones, where she had learned to assess threats, manage dangerous situations, and protect others while staying calm under pressure. Margaret had also completed advanced training in personal security and threat assessment during her military service. She knew how to spot potential dangers, how to vary her routines to avoid predictable patterns, and how to defend herself if necessary. Her strict rules at Lincoln High were not just about discipline. They were based on security protocols she had learned in situations where lives actually depended on them. As Detective Martinez left to continue her investigation, Margaret began implementing subtle security measures throughout the school. She adjusted staff schedules to ensure better coverage of all areas, quietly increased the frequency of locker checks, and modified her own daily routines in ways that would be invisible to students, but would make it harder for anyone to predict her movements. Meanwhile, the threatening messages continued to escalate online. The anonymous user had posted detailed observations about Margaret's habits, including what time she left her apartment, which route she took to work, and even what she typically ate for lunch. Emma Rodriguez was the first student to notice something was wrong. As the leader of the Free Lincoln High campaign, she had been monitoring all the social media activity around their movement. When she saw the threatening messages, she felt sick to her stomach. "This is not what we wanted," she told her friends at lunch. "We were just trying to show that she's too strict. We never wanted anyone to actually threaten her." Jake Morrison looked at the messages on Emma's phone and shook his head. "This is really messed up. We should report this to someone." "I think we should take down the whole campaign," said Sarah Chen. "If this crazy person is using our videos and posts to target Principal Harrison, then we're partly responsible." Emma felt terrible. Their innocent protest against strict rules had somehow attracted the attention of someone dangerous. She realized that by posting videos of Principal Harrison's daily interactions and routines, they might have provided information that was now being used to threaten her. The students quickly worked to remove their posts and videos, but the damage was already done. The threatening messages had become more specific and more disturbing throughout the day. At 3:30, as Margaret was conducting her usual end-of-day walk through the building, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "I see you in your office. Today is the day you learn your lesson." Margaret immediately moved away from her office window and activated the school's emergency communication system. She sent a brief message to all staff. "Implement Code Yellow lockdown procedures. Potential security threat. Remain calm and follow protocols." Within minutes, Lincoln High School was secured. Classroom doors were locked, students were moved away from windows, and staff took their assigned positions. Most students had no idea what was happening, but they could sense the tension in their teachers' voices as they were quietly directed to specific areas of their classrooms. Margaret moved through the building with practiced efficiency, checking on each classroom and coordinating with arriving police officers. Detective Martinez had responded immediately to Margaret's call and was now directing a sweep of the school grounds. Emma Rodriguez watched from her AP English classroom as Principal Harrison walked past in the hallway. For the first time, Emma noticed things she had never seen before. Margaret moved with the confidence and awareness of someone trained for dangerous situations. Her eyes constantly scanned the area around her, checking corners and monitoring sight lines. She communicated with the police officers using hand signals and tactical language that suggested military or law enforcement background. "She's not just a strict principal," Emma whispered to Jake, who was sitting nearby. "Look at how she's handling this. She knows what she's doing." The lockdown lasted 2 hours. Police swept the entire building and grounds but found no immediate threat. However, they did discover evidence that someone had been watching the school from a wooded area behind the building. Cigarette butts, food wrappers, and most concerning of all, photographs of Margaret entering and leaving the building were found at what appeared to be a makeshift observation post. As the lockdown was lifted and students were safely dismissed to waiting parents, Emma Rodriguez made a decision that would change everything. She approached Principal Harrison as she stood coordinating with police near the main entrance. "Principal Harrison?" Emma said quietly. "I need to talk to you about something important." Margaret turned to look at the student who had been leading the campaign against her. Emma's face was pale and she looked genuinely scared. "What is it, Emma?" "I think our social media campaign might have helped whoever is threatening you," Emma said, her voice shaking. "We posted videos showing your daily routines, your office location, even what time you arrive and leave. We never meant for this to happen." Margaret looked at Emma for a long moment. The girl was clearly upset and genuinely concerned about her role in the situation. "Emma," Margaret said gently, "you couldn't have known this would happen. Your campaign was about school policies, not about putting anyone in danger. But we helped them," Emma insisted. "All those videos we posted, all the information we shared. That person used it to watch you and threaten you. We're responsible." For the first time in years, Margaret's stern expression softened. She could see the weight of guilt on Emma's shoulders and recognized the courage it had taken for the girl to come forward. "Emma, the only person responsible for these threats is whoever is making them," Margaret said firmly. "But I appreciate you telling me about this. It shows real character." As Emma walked away, she felt like she was seeing Principal Harrison for the first time. The woman she had thought was just mean and unreasonable had handled a serious threat with skill and professionalism that Emma had never imagined she possessed. The students of Lincoln High were about to learn that there was much more to their strict principal than any of them had ever realized. The weekend passed quietly, but Detective Martinez knew the threat was far from over. The evidence found behind the school suggested someone had been conducting surveillance for weeks. The photographs were taken with a high-quality camera and showed detailed knowledge of Margaret's routines, confirming that this was not just an online troll making empty threats. Monday morning brought new challenges. Word about the lockdown had spread through the community, and parents were demanding answers. The school district had issued a statement about enhanced security measures, but many families wanted more details about the threat against their children's principal, Margaret. Arrived at school an hour earlier than usual, varying her routine as Detective Martinez had suggested. She parked in a different spot and entered through a side entrance that was not visible from the wooded area where the surveillance post had been discovered. As she walked through the quiet hallways before students arrived, Margaret reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. For 8 years, she had been the villain in these students' stories. Now suddenly, she found herself being protected by the same police department and worried about by the same students who had spent weeks making fun of her strict policies. Emma Rodriguez had spent the weekend researching Principal Harrison online. What she found surprised her. There were articles about Margaret's military service, including a commendation for her work protecting civilian populations during overseas deployments. There were also old newspaper clippings from her time at Jefferson Middle School, where she had been praised for her innovative programs helping at-risk students. Emma realized that Margaret Harrison was not just a mean principal who enjoyed making students miserable. She was someone who had dedicated her life to protecting others, first as a soldier and then as an educator. When students began arriving Monday morning, the atmosphere at Lincoln High was different. The joking and mockery that had characterized the Free Lincoln High campaign had been replaced by genuine concern. Students whispered about the lockdown, about the threats against Principal Harrison, and about their own role in potentially making the situation worse. Sarah Chen approached Emma during first period. "I keep thinking about all those videos we posted," she said quietly. "We basically gave a stalker a roadmap of her daily routine." "I know," Emma replied. "I can't stop thinking about it either. We were so focused on proving she was unreasonable that we never considered she might have good reasons for her rules." Jake Morrison joined their conversation. "My dad was in the Army," he said. "When I told him about how Principal Harrison handled the lockdown, he said it sounded like she had military training. He thinks that's why she's so strict about security stuff." The students were beginning to piece together a different picture of their principal, but they were about to learn much more about who Margaret Harrison really was. Tuesday afternoon, Detective Martinez received intelligence that changed everything. The FBI had been monitoring online extremist groups and had traced the threatening messages to a known individual with a history of targeting authority figures, particularly women in positions of power. David Crane was a 34-year-old man with a criminal record, including stalking, harassment, and making terroristic threats. He had been released from prison 6 months earlier after serving time for threatening a female judge. His pattern was to become obsessed with women in authority positions, conduct surveillance, and escalate to physical confrontation. What made this case particularly dangerous was that Crane had military training similar to Margaret's. He was a former soldier who had been discharged for disciplinary reasons and had since become involved with anti-government groups that viewed school officials as symbols of oppressive authority. Detective Martinez immediately contacted Margaret with this information. Principal Harrison, we now know who we're dealing with. This individual is extremely dangerous and has escalated to physical violence in the past. We're recommending that you take leave from school until he's apprehended. Margaret listened to the briefing without showing any sign of fear or concern. Detective, I understand the seriousness of the threat, but I won't abandon my students or my responsibilities because someone is trying to intimidate me. This isn't about intimidation, Detective Martinez insisted. This man has hurt people before. He's not just making threats online anymore. Margaret was quiet for a moment, considering her options. What kind of security can you provide for the school? We can have officers present during school hours, but we can't guarantee your safety 24 hours a day, Detective Martinez admitted. Then we do what we can during school hours. And I'll handle my own security the rest of the time, Margaret said with finality. Detective Martinez was frustrated by Margaret's refusal to take the threat more seriously, but she was beginning to understand that Principal Harrison was not an ordinary educator who would be easily intimidated. Wednesday morning brought the crisis to a head. As Margaret was unlocking her office door at 7 in the morning, she heard footsteps in the hallway behind her. The building should have been empty except for the custodial staff, who were not scheduled to be in that area until 8 o'clock. Margaret immediately activated her radio to alert security, but before she could speak, a man's voice called out behind her. Principal Harrison, we need to talk. Margaret turned slowly, keeping her hands visible and her posture non-threatening. Standing 20 feet away was a tall, thin man in dark clothing. She recognized him from the photos Detective Martinez had shown her. David Crane had somehow gotten into the building. Good morning, Margaret said calmly, as if she were greeting a parent who had come for a conference. The building isn't officially open yet. If you'd like to schedule a meeting, you can call the main office after 8 o'clock. Crane laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're not going to intimidate me like you do those kids. I've been watching you and I know who you really are. Margaret slowly moved her hand toward the emergency alert button on her keys. Who do you think I am? You're just another authority figure who thinks she can control everyone around her, Crane said, taking a step closer. You hide behind your rules and your uniforms, but you're weak just like all the others. Margaret pressed the emergency button, sending a silent alert to police and activating the school's lockdown procedures. She also activated her radio with a coded message that would alert security to her exact location. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Margaret said, keeping her voice steady. I'm just a high school principal trying to do my job. Don't lie to me, Crane shouted, his composure breaking. I know about your military service. I know you think you're some kind of soldier, but you're not in Afghanistan anymore. You're just a woman alone in an empty school. Margaret realized that Crane had done extensive research on her background. He knew about her military service, which meant he also knew she was not as helpless as he might have hoped. You're right, Margaret said quietly. I'm not in Afghanistan anymore, but some lessons stay with you wherever you go. Crane reached into his jacket and Margaret saw the outline of a weapon. In that moment, 8 years of strict rules and military discipline came together. Every security protocol she had implemented, every drill she had conducted, every precaution she had taken had been leading to this moment. Margaret Harrison was about to show everyone exactly who she really was beneath her stern exterior. As David Crane reached for his weapon, Margaret's military training took over completely. In one fluid motion, she dropped her briefcase, stepped sideways to minimize herself as a target, and activated the building's PA system with her emergency code. Code read, all staff implement immediate lockdown. This is not a drill. Her voice echoed through the empty hallways with the kind of authority that left no room for question. Crane pulled out a knife, the blade gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Nobody's coming to help you. I disabled the security cameras and cut the phone lines. It's just you and me. Margaret assessed the situation quickly. The hallway gave her room to maneuver, and her position near the main office meant she had access to additional security equipment. Most importantly, Crane was angry and overconfident, which meant he would likely make mistakes. You've done your research, Margaret said, slowly backing toward her office while keeping her eyes on Crane. You know I was in the military. But do you know what I specialized in? Doesn't matter, Crane snarled, advancing toward her. You're not carrying weapons now. You're just another scared woman. You're right about one thing, Margaret replied, her voice remaining perfectly calm. I'm not carrying weapons. I don't need to. Crane lunged forward with the knife, but Margaret was already moving. Years of hand-to-hand combat training kicked in as she sidestepped his attack, grabbed his wrist, and used his own momentum to send him crashing into the row of lockers. The sound of metal against metal echoed through the hallway as Crane hit the lockers hard. He recovered quickly, but Margaret had already created distance between them and was moving toward the main office where additional security measures were located. You think you're tough because you learned some army tricks? Crane shouted, getting back on his feet. I was a soldier too. I know all the same moves. Margaret reached her office and quickly accessed a locked cabinet that contained emergency equipment. Military police, she said, pulling out a tactical flashlight and pepper spray. My specialty was subduing armed suspects without lethal force. Outside the school, police cars were arriving in response to Margaret's emergency alert. Detective Martinez had been monitoring radio communications and was among the first responders. But the building was locked down, and they needed to breach the security system without triggering additional safety protocols. Inside the hallway, Crane was becoming more desperate and dangerous. He realized that Margaret was not the easy target he had expected, and his careful plan was falling apart. You ruined my life, he screamed, charging at her again. All you authority figures are the same. You think you can control everyone with your rules and your badges. Margaret waited until the last possible moment before moving, using Crane's own speed against him. She caught his knife hand, applied pressure to specific nerve points she had learned in military combat training, and forced him to drop the weapon. David, she said, using his first name deliberately to try to establish human connection. This doesn't have to end badly for you. You can still walk away from this, but Crane was beyond reasoning. Years of anger and resentment had brought him to this moment, and he was not going to be talked down by the woman who had become the focus of his rage. He threw a wild punch that Margaret easily avoided, then tried to tackle her to the ground. Margaret used his momentum to throw him over her shoulder, a move she had practiced thousands of times during her military service. Crane hit the floor hard and stayed down, temporarily stunned. Margaret quickly secured the knife and moved to a safe distance while keeping Crane in sight. She activated her radio to update the responding officers on the situation. This is Principal Harrison. Suspect is down but conscious. Weapon secured. I am unharmed and maintaining visual contact until backup arrives. Meanwhile, students had begun arriving for school only to find police cars surrounding the building and officers directing them to wait in the parking lot. Emma Rodriguez was among the first to arrive and immediately understood that something serious was happening. What's going on? She asked one of the police officers. There's a security situation inside the building, the officer replied. Please wait with the other students until we get the all clear. Emma's stomach dropped as she realized this was connected to the threats against Principal Harrison. She quickly texted her friends, and soon a group of Lincoln High students were gathered together, watching anxiously as police worked to enter the building. She's in there alone with whoever was threatening her, Sarah Chen said, her voice shaking. What if something happens to her? Jake Morrison asked. This is all our fault for posting those videos. Emma felt sick thinking about Principal Harrison facing a dangerous person alone inside the school. All of their complaints about strict rules suddenly seemed incredibly petty compared to the real danger their principal was dealing with. Inside the building, police had finally breached the security system and were making their way through the hallways toward Margaret's location. Detective Martinez was leading the team, following the sound of voices and the path indicated by Margaret's radio transmissions. When they reached the main hallway, they found Margaret standing calmly near her office, holding pepper spray and keeping watch over David Crane, who was sitting on the floor with his hands zip-tied behind his back using makeshift restraints Margaret had improvised from her office supplies. Principal Harrison, are you injured? Detective Martinez called out as officers moved to secure Crane. I'm fine, Detective, Margaret replied, though there was a small cut on her hand where she had been grazed by the knife during the struggle. The suspect is secure and the weapon is on the floor near the lockers. Detective Martinez looked at the scene in amazement. David Crane was a trained former soldier who had successfully intimidated and attacked other victims in the past. Yet Margaret Harrison had not only defended herself successfully, but had managed to subdue and restrain him without serious injury to either of them. As paramedics checked Margaret for injuries and officers took Crane into custody, Detective Martinez shook her head in admiration. "Principal Harrison, what you did here today was extraordinary. Most people wouldn't have been able to handle a situation like this." Margaret straightened her jacket and picked up her briefcase, which had scattered papers across the floor during the confrontation. "Detective, I did what I was trained to do. My job is to protect this school and everyone in it." Outside, the students watched as ambulances and police cars gradually cleared from the parking lot. Finally, they saw Principal Harrison emerge from the building, apparently unharmed but with a small bandage on her hand. Emma Rodriguez realized that while they had been making jokes about their strict principal, Margaret Harrison had been quietly preparing for situations like this. Her military background, her security protocols, and yes, even her strict rules had all been part of a comprehensive approach to keeping students safe. As police gave the all-clear for students to enter the building, Emma made a decision that would change the entire atmosphere at Lincoln High School. As students filed into Lincoln High School that Wednesday morning, the building felt different. The usual chatter and laughter were replaced by hushed conversations about what had happened in their principal's office just an hour earlier. Word spread quickly through the hallways that Principal Harrison had faced down a dangerous intruder and protected the school single-handedly. Emma Rodriguez stood at her locker, staring at the dent in the metal where David Crane had been thrown during his struggle with Principal Harrison. The evidence of the morning's events was right there in front of her, and she could not stop thinking about how wrong she had been about the woman she had spent weeks trying to tear down. "Emma," said a quiet voice behind her. She turned to see Tyler Johnson, the student who had filmed himself getting dress-coded during Silly Rule Day. "I keep thinking about that video I made," Tyler said, his face pale. "I was so proud of exposing Principal Harrison for being strict about the dress code, but now I realize she was probably thinking about safety the whole time." Emma nodded, feeling the weight of guilt she had been carrying since Friday's lockdown. "We all were. We thought she was just being mean, but she was actually protecting us." During first period, teachers struggled to maintain normal lessons while students processed what had happened. Many had pulled up news articles on their phones, reading about David Crane's arrest and learning more about Principal Harrison's military background. Sarah Chen raised her hand in her AP history class. "Mrs. Peterson, can we talk about what happened this morning? I think we need to understand what Principal Harrison did." Mrs. Peterson, who had been at Lincoln High for 15 years and had worked closely with Margaret, nodded. "I think that's appropriate, Sarah. What would you like to know?" "Is it true that she was in the military?" asked Jake Morrison. "Yes," Mrs. Peterson replied. "Principal Harrison served 12 years in the Army, including 2 overseas deployments. She was trained in military police work, which involves protecting people and dealing with dangerous situations." Emma spoke up from the back of the class. "We made all those videos making fun of her rules. We never thought about why she had them." Mrs. Peterson looked at her students thoughtfully. "Principal Harrison has never talked publicly about her reasons for implementing certain policies. But after working with her for 8 years, I can tell you that every rule she creates is designed to keep you safe. She doesn't make arbitrary decisions." During lunch, the cafeteria buzzed with conversation about the morning's events. Students who had participated in the Free Lincoln High campaign were grappling with the realization that they had completely misjudged their principal. "I feel terrible," said Marcus Webb, a sophomore who had created several of the viral memes. "She was protecting us this whole time and we were calling her names and making fun of her." Emma had been thinking about this all morning. She stood up in the middle of the cafeteria and raised her voice to get everyone's attention. "Can I say something?" she called out. The room gradually quieted as students turned to listen to the girl who had led their campaign against Principal Harrison. "I owe Principal Harrison an apology," Emma began, her voice carrying across the large room. "We all do. We spent weeks trying to make her look bad because we didn't like her rules. But this morning, she risked her life to protect our school." Students throughout the cafeteria nodded in agreement. Many looked ashamed as they thought about their participation in mocking videos and social media posts. "I think we need to do something to show her that we understand now," Emma continued. "She's been taking care of us for 8 years and we never even said thank you." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Students began suggesting ways to show their appreciation for Principal Harrison. Someone proposed making a video apologizing for the Free Lincoln High campaign. Others suggested organizing a thank you card signing. Within minutes, dozens of students were volunteering to help with various appreciation projects. Meanwhile, Margaret was in her office dealing with police interviews and incident reports. Detective Martinez had stayed to handle the paperwork and ensure that all evidence was properly documented for David Crane's prosecution. "Principal Harrison," Detective Martinez said as she finished taking Margaret's statement, "I have to ask, how did you stay so calm during that confrontation? Most people would have been terrified." Margaret looked out her office window at the students eating lunch in the courtyard. "Detective, I've been preparing for situations like this my entire career. In the military, we learned that staying calm under pressure is what keeps people alive. As a principal, I realized that the same skills that protected soldiers could protect students. Your students are lucky to have someone with your background looking out for them," Detective Martinez observed. Margaret smiled slightly. "I don't think they've seen it that way until today." Detective Martinez gathered her files and prepared to leave. "Well, after this morning, I think their perspective might change." She was more right than she knew. By the end of the school day, students had organized an impromptu gathering in the main hallway. Emma Rodriguez stood near Principal Harrison's office with a large card that dozens of students had signed. Others held flowers, handmade posters, and small gifts. When Margaret emerged from her office at the end of the day, she stopped in surprise at the sight of nearly 200 students waiting for her. The hallway was quiet except for the sound of her heels on the polished floor as she walked toward the group. Emma stepped forward, holding the signed card. "Principal Harrison, we wanted to apologize. We spent so much time complaining about your rules that we never realized you were protecting us. After what happened this morning, we understand that everything you do is about keeping us safe." Margaret accepted the card, reading some of the handwritten messages from students she had disciplined, lectured, and corrected over the years. Messages like, "Thank you for caring about us even when we didn't appreciate it," and "I'm sorry for not understanding that your rules were about safety," filled the pages. Sarah Chen spoke up from the crowd. "We took down all the videos and posts from the Free Lincoln High campaign. We're embarrassed that we ever created them." Jake Morrison added, "We want you to know that we feel safe at Lincoln High because of you. We just didn't realize it before." Margaret looked at the faces of her students, seeing genuine remorse and newfound respect in their expressions. For 8 years, she had accepted being seen as the strict, unlikable principal because she believed it was necessary to keep them safe. She had never expected or asked for their appreciation. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice carrying the same authority it always had, but with a warmth the students had never heard before. "Your safety will always be my top priority, whether you understand the reasons for my decisions or not. But it means a great deal to know that you do understand." As students gradually dispersed, Emma lingered behind. "Principal Harrison?" she said quietly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, Emma. Do you ever regret being so strict with us? I mean, now that we know why you do it. Wouldn't it be easier if you had just explained your reasons?" Margaret considered the question carefully. "Emma, there are some lessons that can only be learned through experience. If I had told you that my rules were about protection, would you have believed me? Or would you have seen it as just another excuse for being authoritarian?" Emma thought about this and realized Principal Harrison was right. She probably would not have believed or understood the explanation without seeing the proof of why those rules mattered. "Besides," Margaret continued, "my job is not to be liked. My job is to keep you safe and help you learn. If I can do both while also earning your respect, that's a bonus." As Emma walked toward the exit, she turned back once more. "Principal Harrison, thank you for protecting us, even when we didn't deserve it." Margaret watched her students leave the building, knowing that Lincoln High School would be different from now on. The events of that morning had revealed the truth about who she was and why she did what she did. But more importantly, her students had learned that sometimes the people who challenge us the most are the ones who care about us the most. For the first time in 8 years, Margaret Harrison smiled as she walked through the empty hallways of Lincoln High School. Her students finally understood that behind every strict rule and firm correction was someone who would literally put her life on the line to protect them. The next morning, there would be no videos mocking her policies, no campaigns against her leadership, and no jokes about the iron principle. Instead, there would be students who understood that true strength sometimes looks like discipline, that real caring sometimes feels like correction, and that the person who seems strictest might actually be the one who cares the most. Margaret Harrison had spent years being misunderstood, but one dangerous morning had finally shown her students exactly who she really was.